Today on Inside Utah Politics, the legislative session and LGBTQ issues. Troy Williams with Equality Utah is here to discuss what happened this year and where the attention turns now. Plus, President Biden taking gun control into his own hands with an executive order. What he's trying to do and reaction from those opposed.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Glenn Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics. We do begin this morning with Troy Williams, Executive Director of Equality Utah, here to discuss this legislative session. Troy, always glad to have you on the show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Glenn. Good to be here.
First off, just give us an overall view of how you describe this year's legislative session.
Yeah,
everyone laughs when I ask.
I can hold two seemingly contradictory truths. We live in a moment in American and Utah politics where there is this unprecedented level of support, love, and acceptance for LGBTQ Americans. And we live in a time where armed protesters show up to our events to intimidate and threaten us. We live in a moment where we have LGBTQ legal protections on the state, federal level, and several Supreme Court precedents. And we're also seeing nearly 400 anti-LGBTQ bills introduced in state houses across the country and here in Utah as well. So it's the best of times, and it's also challenging.
You always do a good job up on the Hill, I've said over and over again, of the approach and the strategy you take. You stay away from demonizing and calling people out. Talk about why that's an important part of the success you have.
Well,
even though
no, for sure.
I know some people would say that this wasn't a successful year in ways, but still, talk about that.
It's so important that we don't demonize each other, especially our opponents. When you go up and you meet lawmakers on Capitol Hill, it's easy if you just know them through Twitter or through their newscast. It's easy to see them as caricatures, to dehumanize them, and to see them as not full-rounded, compassionate humans. But when you meet them, they are public servants. They have dedicated their lives. You may have an ideological difference with them, but you can certainly see their humanity. And by seeing their humanity, maybe, possibly, they'll see ours as well.
You had a big win this legislative session. Let's start off with that one, and that is involving conversion therapy.
That's right.
This basically takes an administrative rule put into effect by then Governor Herbert at the time and codifies it. Talk about what it does specifically.
Sure. So in 2020, we couldn't get a bill through the legislature. It was very contentious. We couldn't find political alignment. So we kind of went around the legislature and passed it through the Division of Occupational and Professional Licensing. And that has the efficacy of law, but it's not codified in statute. So it banned the harmful practice of conversion therapy, but there was some resentment, I think, that had built up with some lawmakers. They are the lawmaking body of our government. And Representative Bramble was very concerned about it, and Representative Peterson were concerned about the process of it. And they had some issues with some ambiguity in the ban. And it became very clear early in the session that our conversion therapy ban was actually vulnerable to be overturned. And this was that moment where I had all these ideas in my head about Representative Bramble and Brammer or Senator Bramble, Representative Brammer and Representative Peterson. But when I went in to chat with them and I let my defenses go down and actually listened to them, I realized that we weren't as ideologically apart as I originally assumed. And we started to engage with each other in really constructive dialogue and listen to each other. And I realized that neither Representative Peterson or Representative Brammer wanted to harm LGBTQ kids. They didn't want them to be subjected to unethical and harmful practices. They just wanted some clarifications in the law. And I really want to thank both leadership in the House and in the Senate and Governor Cox for encouraging us to get around the table and work together to find a solution. And we did. And so this new law it actually codifies the ban in statute, which is a more enduring protection. It does not allow a therapist to subject a gay or transgender person to conversion therapy to try to alter or force a change in their orientation or their gender identity, but it does allow for some clarifications to help therapists know what they can and cannot talk about. And that's all good. what happened as a result of that is that we passed it through the House unanimously. We passed it through the Senate unanimously. That has never happened. All the conversion therapy bans across the country have never had a unanimous vote in both the House and the Senate. And next week, Governor Cox signs it.
And you started off opposed to this bill.
That's right.
You've already gone through the process of how that played out, but you guys started out saying this is not the way to go, and you were very concerned about this when I talked to you on opening day.
Yeah, conversion therapy, we know it doesn't work. We know it increases people's shame and it increases the likelihood of suicide ideation for young people. And so we were very concerned that that ban would be in jeopardy. But we got together, we worked through it, we found common ground. And I'm so grateful for all the lawmakers who encouraged that process. That is politics at its very best.
Another bill that went through the first 2 weeks of the session, also signed into law by the governor within the first 2 weeks of the session, I believe the second Saturday of the session, was one you opposed, Senate Bill 16. It essentially bans medical treatment for youth who are in the transition process. We heard a lot about, look, we're seeing these more progressive European countries kind of take a different approach to this. So that's one reason we should scale back. And we also heard a lot about this is a permanent decision that those who support the bill say maybe in your teenage years you shouldn't be making. Your thoughts on those points?
Well, this is where I feel like we as the legislature and as the stakeholders where we actually fell short. We weren't able to come together to find common ground and actually find that grand compromise. And I think as a result, we have a lot of parents now and families with transgender children who are frightened, who are scared, who don't know if they're going to be able to stay in the state of Utah because they fear having their access to their medical care taken from them. And we feel it's an overreach of government for the state to get involved in the very intimate decisions that parents and their children must make with their doctors. That's a very sacred relationship, and we don't believe that the state should be involved in that. We do understand that there is a great debate on these issues. We do understand that other countries are making different choices, and we need to allow that process to go forward. We need to look at all the data and trust the science that will get better information as time goes by, because all of us, and I believe everybody on this around the table on this issue, cares about the well-being and the health of transgender children and want to make sure that they can thrive. And I want to make sure that they can thrive not just in this country, but here in Utah, which is their home.
We have about a minute left, but I would really like your insight on, you were at the table in trying to work on this bill. What was a point that you could have got on board with? What would have been the grand compromise, as you say?
There has to be a path forward. Now, these other European countries that are putting up higher guardrails, none of them have actually banned the practice of affirming care. They have just increased the rigor of the protocols and put some of their youth through more robust clinical trials. Had we done that through the University of Utah, I think the law would have been stronger at resisting a legal challenge. But right now, as it is, as a ban, it will be litigated against and probably, I'm going to predict, won't hold up to equal protection claims.
Okay, we have about 30 seconds left. The law passed, it's signed into law now. So if you know someone in your life that might be struggling, what's the best approach?
Well, you have to know that the arc of justice is long, but I'm sorry, what is that? The arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. This is a moment on the journey, but this is not the end of the story. And that we're going to continue to work that every gay and transgender American, it is our birthright to enjoy equal protection under the law, and that's what we're working to achieve.
Troy Williams with Quality Utah, thanks for your time, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Glenn.
Still to come, more on the legislative session, House leaders from both sides weighing in on how the legislature impacted our lives. That's in our panel discussion. But first, another drug maker vowing to drastically slash prices for insulin in the U.S., how much those who rely on it can expect to save. President Biden rolling out new gun control measures meant to crack down on violence. He signed an executive order this week aimed at doing just that. Washington correspondent Hannah Brandt with the details.
Monterey Park, California is a community grieving the 11 people killed during a mass shooting in January.
We remember and mourn today, but I'm here with you today to act.
President Biden traveled there on Tuesday to announce a new executive order on gun control. The effort is wide-ranging and includes measures to increase background checks on gun buyers and promote the use of red flag laws. Plus, he's taking steps to speed up implementation of the gun safety package passed last year.
That will build on the already historic progress we've made during his presidency to try and address this epidemic of gun violence and make our communities safer.
But even the president says these actions don't go far enough and says Congress should do more to crack down on gun violence.
Enough. Do something.
A Republican-controlled House is unlikely to pass the president's gun control wish list. But Democrats aren't giving up on calls for things like universal background checks and an assault weapons ban.
Democrats stand ready to keep working together to combat violence, and we hope a good number of our Republican colleagues will join us once again.
Absent action from Congress, however, the president is doing everything within his power.
And for future mass shootings, the Biden administration says they're looking for ways to give more federal resources to impacted communities.
Another insulin maker plans to slash the price of several insulin drugs by up to 75% in the U.S. Washington correspondent Rashad Hudson with more on what this means.
Novo Nordisk is the latest company to announce it is slashing the price of insulin by as much as 75%.
This is a critical step in the right direction. It's consistent with the president's call to action.
The White House celebrated the news and credited the pressure created by price caps included in last year's Inflation Reduction Act for people on Medicare.
It's a law that makes clear that the American people deserve and expect access to $35 insulin.
The move follows Eli Lilly's announcement earlier this month, capping monthly out-of-pocket insulin costs at $35. Each year, those changes could save hundreds of dollars for the 8 million Americans that depend on insulin.
People who need that insulin for their health, for their safety, for their lives can't afford it anymore. And this lowering of price is very important.
And Christine Link-Young with the White House predicts more companies will start dropping prices.
The president believes that if you call out unacceptable behavior, industry will respond.
The White House is still calling on Congress to pass legislation that would cap the cost across the board, something Missouri Republican Josh Hawley agrees with.
We ought to cap it right now for everybody, not just one insurance company, not just one pharma company, but for all of them.
Novo Nordisk says their price cut won't kick in until January of 2024. Reporting in Washington, Rashad Hudson.
Coming up, what are the biggest hits and misses from the legislative session? We're checking in with House leadership after the break. Time now to recap the legislative session from the perspective of House leadership. For that, we welcome Speaker Brad Wilson and House Minority Leader Angela Romero to the show. Thanks to both of you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's get right into it. This was a session where we saw you really come right out of the gates with a very fast start, and then it ended a couple hours early on the final day on Friday. So every session tends to take its own personality and its own feeling. Speaker, let's start with you. What is your overall feel for this year's legislative session?
It's great to be with you, Glenn. I have been involved in the legislature now for a number of years, and I can tell you with certainty that I haven't seen a legislative session that's had a bigger impact, a positive impact, on the lives of Utahns than this particular one. The issues we tackled were sizable. They touched every aspect of people's lives, whether it's paying lower taxes or improving the education system in our state to making sure we've got the best transportation system in the country. I mean, the list just goes on and on. We had a great legislative session this year.
Representative Romero, your thoughts. What is your overall feel for how this year played out?
Well, I felt like this year was a roller coaster ride I couldn't get off of, but it was exciting at the same time. I agree with the speaker. We did do some significant lifts when it came to looking at the Great Salt Lake, transportation in particular, and education. We may not have went about it the way I would have wanted to go about it, but we were able to fund a full-day kindergarten, which was really important to me. And we were also able to see a lot of strides when it came to covering kids in healthcare.
There was some talk outside of the legislature of this being, or at least feeling like potentially a more partisan legislative session. Speaker, you had some movement within your body where some more moderate members made their exit, replaced by some that were further right thinking. Did you see it that way, and how did you manage that, either way you saw it?
Yeah, I wouldn't actually characterize it that way, Glenn. I mean, we've had some really remarkable members serve in the legislature, and we had a new group come in that was very capable. They were very bright. They worked really hard. The Republicans came in, they were very conservative, but that is typically what we see elected to the House, and they made a really big impact, and they helped us do those big things that we already talked about. So managing them, that's really not my job. My job is to manage the agenda and make sure that we get the process right and the policy works through the process the way that it's designed, and it worked out great this year.
Representative Romero, your thoughts on this being a partisan session, is that how you see it?
Well, I would say I felt like it leaned more right, and for me, I felt like we were a little bit more moderate in years past that I've served. So this is probably the most conservative legislature that I've ever served in. But that said, part of being an elected official is learning who your colleagues are and finding that connection, because my job is to represent the people who elected me and make sure that their voice is heard.
Speaker, you already got into this a little bit, but let's dig further with some more specifics. What do you see as the most important thing you and your colleagues accomplished up on the Hill?
Glenn, that is an impossible question to answer, to be honest, but let me just touch on a few things really quickly. Utahns have been just pummeled by inflation over the course of the last few years, primarily because of the federal government's reckless way they've been using monetary policy and sending money out to people and businesses, and it's created all this inflation, and it's really impacted everyday Utahns' lives, whether it's paying more for gas or groceries or housing, you name it. And one of the things we did is we did a big tax cut so that Utahns have more money that they can spend the way they want to on the things that matter the most to them. We felt like giving Utahns the ability to send less money to the state capitol and use it the way they chose was going to be really, really important. The other thing that I would just couple that with is the amazing year we had for public education. Teachers will see the biggest raise that they've ever seen in the state's history. On top of that, Representative Romero already talked about all-day kindergarten. It's going to have a big impact on the lives of the children in this state, and the list just went on and on, but it was a banner year for public education and education in general.
Representative Romero, you did already mention a few things, but what are some other issues that you think were really important that got through this year?
Well, I agree with the speaker when it comes to public education. Where I would disagree with him is where we tied it to what I would call it's titled scholarship, but for me, I see it as a voucher. So I felt like that was taken away from public education. But overall, I agree with the speaker, especially when it comes to infrastructure, when it comes to transportation. This is not a sexy issue that we talk about, but we really need to look at that infrastructure. We need to look about how we use mass transit. And as the state grows, how do we accommodate all the people that are here moving into Utah, where we're making sure our air is clean and people have a place to live. And so one of the other things that we really looked at was affordable housing and how do we address homelessness. So as the speaker mentioned, we accomplished a lot of stuff, and particularly, we always tend to forget this, but domestic violence and sexual assault, that was something that was a priority for the Lieutenant Governor, I know for the Speaker and the President and myself, and so that's something I felt like we've taken some major steps and still need to take some more, but we moved further than I've seen since I've been elected.
Speaker, address that if you will, because that did get some attention early on, House Bill 215, where we took those two issues, the teacher raise and the voucher program, and married them together into one bill. Why did you see that as the right way forward?
Well, one of the things that I believe, and I think a lot of folks believe, is that parents are those most capable and most invested in their kids' education. And we've got amazing public schools. As a son of a public school teacher and two sisters that teach public school, I know how hard they work and what a great job they're doing. But sometimes there are needs that our kids have that maybe the public school around the corner isn't the perfect fit for. So the legislature decided this year to give parents the opportunity to have a scholarship where they could choose to take their kids somewhere else and use that scholarship to help facilitate their kids' public education. And we felt that was a choice that was important for parents to have. Not a lot of parents will choose to do that, but some will, and it'll make a big difference in the lives of those kids. Well, but at the same time, we wanted to make sure that our public school teachers were getting paid very, very well. And so we thought it made sense to do those things at the same time, and we did, and it's going to result in great options for our kids, but also our school teachers getting the biggest raise they've ever seen.
Right off the bat, also there were some transgender bills addressing transgender youth. We also saw some abortion bills come up, ended up passing through the legislature as well. Representative Romero, your thoughts on those bills?
Well, I was very disappointed that we, as a legislature, would dive into this. As you know, I'm probably rare up there. I really feel like a woman has the choice to do what she wants with her own body, and that's a decision between her and her doctor. And when it comes to transgender youth, I mean, we have so few youth that are transitioning, and that's something very personal to them and their parents. And so I really feel like that should be left to them, their doctor, and their family. And sometimes when we pass legislation, we think we're helping, but there's those unintentional consequences. And so I worry about our trans youth. I worry about their mental health. I worry that they feel like they're not supported. And so that's a message that they hear sometimes when we run legislation, whether that's the intention or whether intention was good or it wasn't. That's what I'm hearing in the community.
Speaker, your thoughts on that bill? It really flew through in the first couple of weeks. Why do you see that as an area the legislature needs to get involved in?
Well, this is an area that's been discussed all over the world, actually, including here in Utah. And there are certain decisions that are irreversible. And basically what the legislature said this session is that for our youth that may want to change their gender, that irreversible decision needs to be made slowly. And so we passed a bill that said that we're going to study this issue for a few years, but in the meantime, putting kids on puberty blockers is something that we're going to push the pause button on right now until we have more information. And we understand how complicated and emotionally charged these issues are, but I think we landed in a really, really good spot.
We have about a minute left. I'd like to get both of your thoughts on the quick start this year. Speaker, you and the President both, making it clear that would be the strategy from the beginning. Looking back, is that something that worked out and that you may see again in the future?
Well, we knew we had some complicated issues that were going to require a lot of focus and energy from the legislature, and so we decided to tackle those early in the session. I think it worked well. It gave us the opportunity then to switch to the budget, which was a big budget this year. It was the biggest budget in our state's history, $29 billion, and that took a lot of work. And so getting some of these tough issues out early, focusing on the budget worked well. And for the first time that I can remember, we adjourned before 10 o'clock at night on the last day, so that was amazing.
Representative Romero, your thoughts on that quick start and getting those really big bills out of the way in the first few weeks?
Well, I felt like with those big bills, we probably needed to have more discussion and more input from community. So I guess I saw it a little bit different. As I mentioned earlier, I felt like I was on this roller coaster ride, and it just never dropped me off. And but you know, this is the legislative process. This is how things are done, and our main priority is passing the budget. I mean, that's a big budget that we passed this year, and there was a lot of services a lot of things that did work. Did I agree with the bills that were passed at the beginning of the session? No. And you saw a partisan divide when it came to talking about transgender youth, talking about abortion, and those really complicated issues that are so complex that I really feel like that shouldn't have been a part of our conversation as a legislature.
All right, we have run out of time. I really appreciate your insight and how the session played out in your eyes. Thanks to both of you for being here this morning. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Glenn.
Thank you.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break. We leave you now to look at what's on the radar in the world of politics. Governor Spencer Cox has until this Thursday to review and take action on all the legislation passed by the legislature. The final day to begin a veto override session is Tuesday, May 2nd. And this year is a municipal election year. The primary is set for Tuesday, August 15th. Make sure to connect with me on social media or through email. Let me know what's on your mind and the issues that matter to you. Thanks so much for making us part of your Sunday morning. We hope to see you again next week as we go inside Utah politics.